The minor arcana, exerted with permission from La Kabbalah de Predicion, Kier by J. Iglesias Janero. '23. The Plower. The plower is in the act of cultivating the earth, and his consciousness symbolizes the virtue of a human's self-realization. Modulating attribute. It is associated to the action of the planet Mercury, the letter T, the number 5. It represents the elemental intelligence in its labor of knowing how to harvest the fruits of experience. Transcendental axiom. My mind is grinding flour for me and flour for my neighbor. Or rather, my mill is grinding flour for me. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises powerful friends the necessity of their help and the ability to attain it if one has faith in friendship. It signifies elevation by means of those friends and one's own willpower. 24. The Weaver. The Weaver, in the act of cultivating domestic virtues, symbolizes the diligent woman as keeper of home and honor. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the action of the planet Venus and the letter U and the number 6. It represents the elemental intelligence in its labor of applying exertion to the fruits of learning things. Transcendental axiom. My loom is weaving net after net, a cloth for my honor and cloth to honor. Forecasting element. An element of prediction. It promises organized economy, chastity and maternity, feminine protection, and good performance of obligations. 25. The Argonaut. The Argonaut, in the act of sailing in the search of the unknown, symbolizes the virtue of the human's own inspiration. Modulating attribute. It is associated to the planet Neptune, the letter V, and the number 7. It represents the valiant man who confronts the dangers of the unknown. Transcendental axiom. My boat is sailing persistently, sailing by night, sailing by day. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises absences, emigrations, abandonment, changes, domestic discords, something that is required, and much that is lost. 26. The Prodigy. The Prodigy, in the act of consummation, symbolizes the human virtue of creating what is astonishing, astounding, and which searches the marvelous. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Saturn, the letter X, and the number 8. It represents the action of time as justice and power of manifestation. Transcendental axiom. A time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises episodes that are fulfilled, threatening dangers, surprising events, and unthought teachings. '27. The Unexpected. The unexpected, in the act of becoming manifested, symbolizes the virtue of subconscious human processes. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mars, the letter Y, and the number 9. It represents inner life as a determining cause of the outer. Transcendental axiom. Neither excess honey to sweeten nor vain glory to thrive. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises conditioned triumphs, surprises, conjurations, treasons, findings, discoveries, some of them tardy. 28. Uncertainty. Uncertainty in the act of deliberation symbolizes the virtue of a human's own determination. So symbolizes the virtue of a human's own determination. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Pluto, the letter Z, and the number 1. It represents judgment as a determined cause of acts, or rather a determinate cause of acts. Transcendental axiom. Do not seek in others for what is in thee, neither seek in thee for what is in others. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises delays, obstacles, contrarieties, or rather contrarieties, mysteries to be solved, and science to solve them. 29. Domesticity. Domesticity, as an act of concord, symbolizes the virtue of human dominion by means of persuasion. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the moon, the letter B, and the number 2. It represents nature's peace, equilibrium of elements, pastoral joy. Transcendental axiom. Let your eyes become youthful eyes, and let thy word become an elder's prudence. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises remorse, indecisions, perplexities, timidity, pastoral life, advantageous affairs, enterprises that bring struggles but with satisfactory outcomes. 30. Exchange. Exchange as an act of reciprocal convenience symbolizes the virtue of human life and society. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the letter C, and the number 3. It represents individual expansion by means of commercial conviviality. Transcendental axiom. Reap thy land carefully, but do not harvest your goods with avarice. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises social life, intercommunications, commerce, traffic, variety, discussion, although many times without solution. 31. Impediments. Impediments as incentives for the developing of one's own efficiency. Symbolizes the virtue of human reaction against the opposition. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Uranus, the letters CH, and the number 4. It represents the principle of depuration or depuration as an element of progress. Transcendental axiom. Do not pass merciless judgment, neither have mercy without judgment. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises expectations, promises, in general, domestic devices, restrictions, inferior quality trading, and a position not always beneficial for both parties. And I think what this means is that when you're trading with somebody, or there's some kind of trade going on, the inferior aspect is on to you. So you receive it like that, and so it's not always fair on your end. 32. Magnificence. Magnificence as an act of material communion symbolizes the virtue of evidencing a human's own value. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mercury, the letter D, and the number 5. It represents the principle of ostentation as a cause of discussion. Transcendental axiom. Exhaust the resources of thine intelligence, but do not exhaust those of thine heart. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises dangers because of choleric or loquacious excess, ostentation of material elements, litigations, luxury as a cause of triumph or failure, oppositions or cooperations between people of equal hierarchy. 33. Alliance. Alliance as an act of communion between equals symbolizes the virtue of human affinity through identity. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Venus, the letter E, and the number 6. It represents the principle of one's own realization by means of association. Transcendental axiom. Rejoice with the love of thy youth, and rejoice even more with the love of thy maturity. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises dealings with precision, lasting alliances, increasing of prosperity, progress, happy contingencies. 34. Innovation. Innovation as an element of evolution symbolizes the virtue of undeviating human effort. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Neptune, the letter F, and the number 7. It represents the principle self-inspiration as guidance for activities. Transcendental axiom. Length of days upon thy right hand, and works and honor upon thy left. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises inventions, new enterprises, temptations, temerity, findings, some fortunate, others disconcerting, or rather disconcerting. 35. Grief. Grief as an act of moral affliction symbolizes the virtue of human tribulation in its depurating action. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Saturn, the letter G, and the number 8. It represents the principle of the knowledge of one's own insufficiency. Transcendental axiom. That which is now comes from that which has been, and what has been is what shall be now. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises alarms, consternations, melancholies, sadness, obstacles, unexpected events. 36. Initiation. Initiation as a revivifying act symbolizes the virtue of progressive actualization of human powers. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mars, the letter H, and the number 9. It represents the principle of developing one's own virtues. Transcendental axiom. Pleasant is the studio, pleasant as it is to sing, pleasant it is to listen. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises births, new beginnings, premises, forthcoming fortune, success in businesses, dissipations, declinations, or declinations. 37. Art and science. Art and science as factors of individual evolution symbolizes the virtue of a human's own discipline as an element of progress. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the sun, the letter I, and the number 1. It represents the principle of creation by means of applied knowledge. Transcendental axiom. Behold the promised land before mine eyes. Help me, O foot, to arrive there. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises sincere friendship, magnificent aids, probity, equity, imperative resources, compulsions, perversions, popularity, but not entirely edifying. (38) Biplicity. Biplicity as an act of sagacity or sagacity symbolizes the human virtue of knowledge voluntarily induced. I guess it's actually pronounced biplicity. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the moon, the letter J, and the number 2. It represents the principle of the autonomous as an element of comparison and selection. Transcendental axiom. Virtuous woman, not all of those who see thy works can see thy virtues. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises the influence of women in one's affairs. Wisdom and torpidity when resolving them, virtue and scandal, honesty and vice, chastity and corruption. 39. Testimony. Testimony, as in irrecusable evidence, symbolizes the human virtue of verification for proof. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the letter K, and the number 3. It represents the principle of demonstration as an element of conviction. Transcendental axiom. Place thy intentions as witnesses before thyself. However, place thy works as witnesses before others. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises conformity, approximations, comparison, banquets, traveling, delay, matrimonies, presumed or real adultery, unforeseen or foreseen arrivals. (40) Presentiment. Presentiment as an instinctual knowledge symbolizes the human virtue of anticipated knowledge of what shall occur. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Uranus, the letter L, and the number 4. It represents the principle of prescience as a natural faculty. Transcendental axiom. Do not be a man with open eyes to covetousness, nor a woman with open ears to flattery. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises a very well retributive work. Application, reflection, attraction, sympathy, seduction, threat of ruin, mortifying affections. 41. Uneasiness. Uneasiness as an act of disheartened attitude symbolizes the human virtue of always seeking for the best. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mercury, the letters LL, and the number 5. It represents the principle of urban life. Transcendental axiom. The bows of the mighty ones were broken, and the bows of the weak were fitted with strength. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises indignation, violence, group of people in motion, bountiful family, puppy loves, joyful in the opposite sense. I don't know what the opposite sense would be of joy. 42. Preeminence. Preeminence as acknowledgement or acknowledgement of superiority symbolizes the human virtue of acceptation of hierarchical order. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Venus. The letter M and the number 6. It represents the principle of power and voluntary obedience. Transcendental axiom. If utmost in dignity and power, be then utmost in thy merits. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises advances, triumph, pomposity, superiority, sincerity, surprising loves. 43. Imagination. Imagination as a heartened, rejoicing act symbolizes the human virtue of the expression of contentment. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Neptune, the number N, and the number 7. It represents the creative principle of induced ideas. Transcendental axiom. Joyfulness of my heart, beautify my face. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises satisfactions, contentment, decency, modesty, enjoyments, parties, pleasant preparations, violent passions, forbidden loves, divorce, and prosperous businesses. 44. Thought. Thought as a creative element symbolizes the human virtue of giving sensible shape to that whose shape is intelligible. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Saturn, the letter N, and the number 8. It represents the creative principle of self-edification. Transcendental axiom. Overcome suspicion wisely and enjoy what is yours in hope. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises projects, deliberation, resolutions, determinations, mutual understanding, fulfillment of what is desired after arduous struggles by means of a person of the opposite sex. 45. Regeneration. Regeneration as a reiterative act symbolizes the human virtue of remembering the past and preventing the future. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mars, the letter O, and the number 9. It represents the principle of memorization and visualization. Transcendental axiom. Everything is beautiful in its time, and everything is flavorful in its ripeness. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises spiritual resurrection, physical rejuvenation, reconsideration of that which was, and some first fruits of that which will be, as well as vigor, decrepitude, something from infancy and from elderhood, influence of relatives in loving matters, breakage and abandonment. 46. Patrimony. Patrimony, as an act of continuity, symbolizes the human virtue of possession by inheritance, modulating attribute. It is associated with the sun, the letter P, and the number 1. It represents the principle of natural prosecution. Transcendental axiom. The one who is content in the little will open the doors of plethora. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises friendships, or rather, friendship bequest, inheritances by own rights, donations, testaments, traditions, forefathers, family, conjugal affinity. For a man, danger because of a woman. For a woman, danger of seduction. (47) Deduction. Deduction as an act of knowledge symbolizes the human virtue of knowing by means of one's own inspiration. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the moon, the letter Q, and the number 2. It represents the principle of deduction as an element of illumination. Transcendental axiom. To be resplendent in the light and the heat in the fire is now thy mission, and from now on. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises new lights, new teachings, spiritual afflictions, mature hopes, coming joys or sufferings, support of relatives, virtuous and lasting loves. 48. Consummation. The consummation as an act of plenitude symbolizes the human virtue of one's own conviction. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the letter R, and the number 3. It represents the principle of determination of conduct. Transcendental axiom. Drink the drops of thy cistern, of the flowing of thy well. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises achievements, science, victory, conclusions, resolutions, impossible loves, that which is already irremediable. (48) Consummation. The consummation as an act of plenitude symbolizes the human virtue of one's own conviction. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the letter R, and the number 3. Okay, actually I read this one. 49. Versatility. Versatility as an act of reciprocity. It symbolizes the human virtue of correspondence in the equivalence or equivalence. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Uranus, the letter S, and the number 4. It represents the principle of permutation as element of prosperity. Transcendental axiom. Pleasant is the work to whom labors with contentment, and pleasant is the leisure to the one who deserves it. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises removal, changes, new affections, rivalry in loves and undertakings, vicissitudes, but some for the better. 50. Affinity. Affinity as an efficient cause for the awakening of emotions symbolizes the human virtue of personal attractiveness. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mercury, the letter T, and the number 5. It represents the principle of natural incentive as a modulating power of actions. Transcendental axiom. Woman, thou art an ember in the fire, and thou, man, the wind that livens it. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises illusions, passions, appetites, desires, love, hallucinations, recklessness, dangers that are ignored. '51. Counseling. Counseling as an act of prudent advice symbolizes the human virtue of reverence to knowledge and responsibility of what one knows. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Venus, the letter U, and the number 6. It represents the principle of respect to established order. Transcendental axiom. Unto silver is likened the word uttered by the sage, yet unto gold is likened the one who listens and follows him. Transcendental axiom and forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises judgment, judicial matters, relations with people of authority, dangerous enemies among those people, fortune in the field of weapons or the magistracy, danger of perfidies. 52. Premeditation. Premeditation as an act of calculation symbolizes the human virtue that preconceives the longed-for results. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Neptune, the letter V, and the number 7. It represents the principle of evaluation of factors. Transcendental axiom. Place thine heart in all thy words, but do not place all the words within thine heart. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises artifices, faking manners, malice, dissimulation, astuteness, sterility, indigence, feminine hatreds, and fights as a consequence of such hatreds. '53. Resentment. Resentment as a wounded, heartened act symbolizes the human virtue of one's own defense. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Saturn, the letter X, and the number 8. It represents the reprisal principle. Transcendental axiom. Do not swing a revengeful sword, neither fear the corrective sword. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises range, imprudence, ineptitude, attacks, defense, criticisms, calumnies, danger by the fire, fights against people of status. 54. Examination. Examination as a heartening deliberation upon conclusion symbolizes the human virtue of proceeding with justice. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mars, the letter Y, and the number 9. It represents the principle of free debate. Transcendental axiom. Search around thy village and harvest the fallen grains, but do not search for resentments, neither collect misdemeanors. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises speculations, inquiries, imputations, treasons, occult enemies, defamation. 55. Contrition. Contrition as an act of repentance symbolizes the human virtue of recognizing one's own error. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Pluto, the letter A, and the number 1. It represents the principle of voluntary repair. Transcendental axiom. Do not sow an assortment of seeds in thine orchard, neither harvest them within thine heart. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises lamentations, spiritual afflictions, unpleasantness, unsatisfied profit, acquisition of material wealth by means of moral suffering. 56. Pilgrimage. Pilgrimage as an act of interior purification symbolizes the human virtue of affliction. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the moon, the letter B, and the number 1. It represents the principle of one's own redemption. Transcendental axiom. Hearten and comfort the afflicted one, and keep thyself enthused within thine own tribulations. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises celibacy, timidity to overcome matters related with sanctuaries or with people who attend them, sufferings, mysterious dangers, enmity amongst people of status. 57. Rivalry. Rivalry as proof of competition between opponents symbolizes the human virtue of one's own esteem. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the letter C, and the number 3. It represents the principles of skill. Transcendental axiom. For a just man falls 7 times, and if he indeed is just, 7 times he rises up again. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises delicate circumstances, critical moments, oppositions, conjunction of events, criticism, debates, what is fatal, the fulfillment of destiny. 58. Requalification. Requalification as an act of reconsideration of facts, or rather reconsideration, symbolizes the human virtue of evaluation of opposites. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Uranus, the letters CH, and the number 4. It represents the principle of conjecturing by exam. Transcendental axiom. If thy neighbor leaves thee confused, consult the case with thine own heart. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises warning of dangers, observations right on time, reproaches, pretensions without merit, lost positions, unsuccessful hopes, desire to do, courage to suffer. 59. Revelation. Revelation as an act of unveiling the hidden symbolizes the human virtue of making intelligible that which was unintelligible. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mercury, the letter D, and the number 5. It represents the principle of manifestation, transcendental axiom. As the metals are tested in the fire, likewise the value of a man is tested in the mouth of who praises or censures him. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises declarations, authorizations, messages, messengers, contradictory news, voyages, adversity, loquacity, violation of secrets. Evolution. Evolution as a process of transformation symbolizes the human virtue of the successive awakening of the consciousness. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Venus, the letter E, and the number 6. It represents the principle of metamorphosis, transcendental axiom. The one who sows and the one who waters the sown are the same to the seed. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises detriments, setback of fortune, diminishing, affections that die, beings which are buried, danger of ruin because of fixation of ideas, adverse changes, painful events. 61. Solitude. Solitude as an act of heartening concentration symbolizes the human virtue of interior contemplation. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Neptune, the letter F, and the number 7. It represents the principle of isolation. Transcendental axiom. Pay what thou owe, pay tax to the tax collector, pay worship to the worshipper, and pay honors to the honorable. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises reserve, precaution, retirement, inability, vigilance, economy, good behavior, voluntary or unavoidable retirement from social life. 62. Proscription. Proscription as an act of dispersion symbolizes the human virtue of counteracting and pushing away the harmful. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Saturn, the letter G, and the number 8. It represents the principle of incompatibility. Transcendental axiom. The one who guards his tongue guards his soul. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises oppositions, ruptures, divisions, antagonisms, reclusions, absences, aversions, controversies, embarrassing enterprises. 63. Communion. Communion as an act of partnership and recognition symbolizes the human virtue of sharing. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mars, the letter H, and the number 9. It represents the principle of unity within diversity. Transcendental axiom. Give a seed to the one who wants to sow and does not have it, and advice to the one who wants to succeed and does not know how. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises affection, tenderness, intimacy, affinity, correspondences, mutual protection against third parties, and fights for common ideals. 64. Zeal. Zeal has a heartening, exalted expression, symbolizes the human virtue of a fervent longing. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the sun, the letter A, and the number 1. It represents the inner fire principle. Transcendental axiom. Fortitude is wisdom, and power the longing that moves it. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises extreme passions, fetching temper, range, animosity, enterprises that require fights, conquests because of vigor, success in matters of love. 65. Learning. Learning as a teaching and warning symbolizes the human virtue of knowledge through experience. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the moon, the letter J, and the number 2. It represents the principle of one's own discipline. Transcendental axiom. Day or night, the one who increases knowledge for his own good also increases his sorrow. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises internal and external teachings, defects and virtues, ascensions and descents, protection granted by a person major in age and in status, more joy for the coming future than the joy which the present is supposedly presenting. 66. Perplexity. Perplexity as an act of indecision when choosing symbolizes the human virtue of selection. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the letter K, and the number 3. It represents the principle of appraisal in resolutions. Transcendental axiom. Whosoever removes stones shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaves wood shall be endangered thereby. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises vacillations, matters in suspense, conditional protection, ascensions and descents, wealth by the support of influential ladies, security in some things and insecurity in others, yet hope in everything. 67. Friendship. Friendship as an act of devotion and affection symbolizes the human virtue of veneration. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Uranus, the letter L, and the number 4. It represents the principle of pure love. Transcendental axiom. A quick hand to give and a fast foot to fulfill. With you, both, I am on the hill or in the valley. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises profits by means of accomplished duties, placidness of spirit, unexpected arrivals, triumph over obstacles, support from friendship, devoted affections. 68. Speculation. Speculation as an act of appraisal for value symbolizes the human virtue of reasoning. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mercury, the letter LL, or the letters rather, and the number 5. It represents the principle of directed diligence. Transcendental axiom. May thine eyes see without fear and thine hands with love. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises intelligent laboring, beneficial learning, abundance of material goods, generosity, liberality, favorable news on monetary matters, Right calculation for undertakings. 69. Chance. Chance is a law known by the instinct, symbolizes the human virtue of transcendental knowledge. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Venus, the letter M, and the number 6. It represents the principle of the primary faculties as guidance in the way of life. Transcendental axiom. There is a fruit in any labor, and there is a labor in any fruit. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises retributions, compensations, satisfactory changes, opportunity for ranking ascension, success in real estate properties, thoughtless accomplishment of wishes, fortuitous attractions. 70. Cooperation. Cooperation, as an act of collaboration in effort, symbolizes the human virtue of knowing how to complement each other. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Neptune, then the letter N, and the number 7. It represents the principle of reciprocity. Transcendental axiom. There is no man without science, neither science without man. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises sincere affections, fulfilled promises, the vanishing of hopes without foundation, prosperity by means of death or mysterious causes, progress by application of arts or sciences. (71) Avarice. Avarice as a calculative, selfish act symbolizes a twisted human virtue of the longing for power. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Saturn, the letter S, and the number 8. Modulating attribute. It represents the principle of prevention. Greedy is greed, quenched with miseries, and unpleasantly abundant. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises ushery, egotistical plans that bring remorse, great hopes and small results, danger of robbery, difficulties in preserving the place that is occupied or the acquired status. 72. Purification. Purification as a depurative act symbolizes the human virtue of self-edification. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mars, the letter O, and the number 9. It represents the principle of one's own liberation. Transcendental axiom. Listen to the doctrine of thy father and forsake not the law of thy mother. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises ingenuousness, vexation of spirit, light that illuminates and heats, fortune by means of a laborious effort, fortunate acquisitions, satisfactory news. 73. Love and desire. Love and desire as natural stimuli symbolizes the human virtue of possessing the elements that provide delight. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the sun, the letter P, and the number 1. It represents the principle of natural science. Transcendental axiom. Shuttle of my loom, weaving the cloth that shall become my coat. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises illusions, ardent passions, attractions, ambitions, hope in something that depends on the will of the person or of persons of the opposite sex, unexpected goods, and danger of losing them because of the interference of false friends. 74. Offering. The offering as a propitiatory act symbolizes the human virtue of rendering cult to the highest. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the moon, the letter Q, and the number 1. It represents the reverent love principle. Transcendental axiom. Like an offering of flour on the best of thy plates must be thy giving to the afflicted heart. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises devotion, adoration, fervor, loving passion, harmony and discord, inspirational thoughts, acts of prodigy, variable initiatives, more dissipating than edifying achievements. 75. Generosity. Generosity as a high-minded act symbolizes the human virtue of liberality. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the letter R, and the number 3. It represents the principle of abnegation. Transcendental axiom. Fruits pleasant to the palate, so sweet when receiving or giving them. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises alms, satisfactory definitions in the end, rewards, inheritance without death, acquisition of wealth, stable fortune. 76. The dispenser. The dispenser in the act of distributing grace symbolizes the human virtue of mercy. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Uranus, the letter S, and the number 4. It represents the principle of human providence. Transcendental axiom. Approach us, foreigner, and eat thereof from our bread and from the sauce of my people. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises noble considerations, importance, celebrity, generosity, birth, fortune by means of intelligently directed enterprises, abundant laboring, and genius in order to make it useful. 77. Disorientation. Disorientation as an act of forbearance symbolizes the human virtue of acknowledgement and reflection. Modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Mercury, the letter T, and the number 5. It represents the principle of association of ideas. Transcendental axiom. Paths are requested for a diligent foot and tools for a laborious hand. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises embarrassing situations, confusion of ideas, perplexity upon decisions, unexpected obstacles, probabilities of good and bad fortune, depending on one's own inspiration towards one or the other. '78. Renaissance. Renaissance as an act of initiation symbolizes the human virtue of attaining successive preeminences, modulating attribute. It is associated with the planet Venus, the letter U, and the number 6. It represents the principle of natural evolution. Transcendental axiom. Sun of midday, moon of midnight, thank goodness for good or bad fortune. Forecasting element. As an element of prediction, it promises ecstasies, pure joy, satisfactions, moral and material contentment, honors, and luck.